So this is something that I wanted to talk about for a very long time, but since my channel essentially got its way into the door into the alternative media spectrum through geopolitics, stepping all the way into the realm of ancient history, that's a big leap. And not only ancient history, but ancient technology, and then jumping all the way over to the left and dealing with real science, the truth about science, the parts of science that the mainstream media overlooks. They turn a blind eye to. Yet the evidence is readily available and it continues to prove itself on a daily basis. I've wanted to talk about these things forever, but how do you step into that? So instead of waiting around and trying to find some kind of way to step into that realm, I'm just going to jump right into the door, get right into the biggest picture, the biggest thing about ancient history, and knock this bad boy out the park. I'm going to do this as an introductory to this topic so I can build off of it and shoot off into different areas in this broad spectrum, because there is so much to talk about that I'll never talk about all of it. I'm going to have to focus on certain areas that are very important. And the one that's most important, the one that I want to build off of, is the human timeline. Why is this important? The human timeline. Because, as you know, nothing's more important towards the future and what's happening now than what happened in our past. It's why I did the documentary on the Sabbateans. It's why we have Zionism and the way Zionism is today, based off the evidence and research that I put towards it and others have put towards it, even Jews themselves. So let's look at the typical taught in school, taught in college, taught in high school, any kind of grade school timeline that everybody knows. Of course, we start up here in the 9/11 era, otherwise known as the Information Age, and we start going back towards the normal post-war era, Machine Age, Industrial Revolution, Age of Discovery, Middle Ages, High Middle Ages, Early Middle Ages, Antiquity, the Iron Age, Bronze Age, Early Bronze Age, and then basically that's where it starts. We go all the way back to the old Egyptian kingdom, we go back to the Samaritans, the Mesopotamians. That's essentially it. From our known history that it goes back, that's essentially all we have as far as civilization goes. Yes, we talk about the Neolithic and Mesolithic, all the way to 200,000 years ago, where we say this is the earliest human bones that we found that look like modern human bones, and then they say we evolved from apes from there. And that's pretty much it. Our timeline is very, very short in the grand scheme of things. We're looking at about 4,000 years of modern civilization. And when I say modern, I mean not tribal hunter-gatherers as they see it. Because essentially they look at the Neolithic as cavemen. And I'm sure in certain circumstances that's what the case was. But this is my biggest key about ancient history. That's not it. That is not the truth. There's a whole spectrum of human history on this planet that has been erased from time, that has been erased off the slate. And there is evidence pouring out of the seams to prove this. But the mainstream does not like to hear this. They do not like this. And quite honestly, I'm trying to get down to the bottom as to why they ignore this altogether. But before I get to that, what is some proof that our history goes beyond this 3,000 to 4,000 years of just post-Neolithic history? What is some proof that there were more than just primitive cavemen using stone tools and just hunting to survive? Well, the biggest piece of evidence that is left behind are ancient megalithic structures, which essentially just means giant structures that are built out of stone. And when something is built out of stone, it tends to last a long time. And I'm not saying like concrete or just hard rock materials. I'm talking about things that are carved out of solid stone, such as the pyramid, the Sphinx. Pyramids all around the world. You have them in South America. You have pyramids in North America, actually. You have pyramids in Turkey. You have pyramids in China. You have pyramids on almost every continent that we've been to. There's pyramids and other large stone structures. They're not all pyramids, but that's what most people know and see and can visualize as pyramids. And I know this topic has been tainted by the whole ancient astronaut theorist theory, But throw all that out the window. That's not where I'm going with this. All I'm doing is talking about a pre-existent civilization that just predates our known history. All we have left are megaliths and these giant stone structures, which include pyramids. Now, what our modern scientists have done is slapped on a label here and there because they find more modern relative to this subject civilizations that built on top of these megaliths. And I'll go ahead and show some pictures of that right now. See, if we look in this picture here, on the bottom we have these massive multi-ton stones that are very precisely cut given the amount of erosion that has happened to them over the thousands of years they have existed. But on top of this, we have these smaller stones that have been stacked up, and there was mortar used to keep them together. These stones are not like that. The difference between these two building constructions, in this case it's in Cusco, which is in South America, are very different. You see, other civilizations came in and built on top of these pre-existing megalithic structures. And this is something that is reoccurring all around the world, where more modern civilizations, again relative to our topic, build on top of these more ancient sites, and then people come in and say, oh, this is all built by this one civilization, even though that civilization didn't have the technology or the ability to build such a site. And again, that's a reoccurring theme all around the world. You have it in Machu Picchu. Again, you can see how it's definitely less advanced, built on top and around it, built on top these shapen massive stones. I know this one doesn't have a scale, but these are absolutely massive. See, here's a better one from Machu Picchu. If you look how large these stones are, now some of these are ajar, and that's because of seismic activity or a large scale event that literally separated these bricks. But if you actually get up close, you can see that they're so tightly put together that you can't even fit human hairs between them in several occasions. Again, this side as well. But these are so massive and precise, and there's a human for scale up there. These are huge, massive bricks, and they're telling us that civilizations that are at the very beginning of our known history, that are right on the edge of these Neolithic times, where they're using bronze and stone tools at this point to make structures that would be a massive challenge even our modern technology to do. It's not impossible, but it would be a very large challenge that these ancient cultures were building. But then again, we have the sloppy, more primitive type building put on top of them, and then they say, oh no, it was built by the primitive people. That's hard to believe. And then we'll have, again, the ancient astronaut theorists come in and say, well, the only thing it could have been is aliens. Well, that's not the case. Here's what I want to present to you. So back to this timeline, there is just a cutoff here, a complete cutoff. Again, we go all the way back to the Sumerians, and then it's essentially just cavemen before that. Nothing else. Nothing else. And why is there this cutoff, you might ask? Why does all of history go back just 10 to 12,000 years and there's nothing? There's nothing before that. Maybe cave paintings in a wall that they might take and date some bones in a cave and say, oh, this is pre-existing to that time. But here is the reason why there is a cutoff. If we look here on this chart, this is a temperature chart. This is based off of ice samples. Now we know that the Earth, through its timeline, has gone through cold and warm, ice ages, and then it warms back up. This is a normal cycle that the Earth goes through because of the sun goes through these different cycles, and it puts the Earth in an ice age, and then the sun gets more intense, and then all of a sudden we come back out of this ice age. But this cycle was different. This is known as the Younger Dryas, and from a period of 12,800 years ago all the way up to 11,600 years ago, it was a massive ice age. In fact, there was an ice sheet that was on North America that was several miles high. Not several thousands of feet high, several miles high. That is massive. And then all of a sudden, and I say all of a sudden relatively, it could have been anywhere from 3 years down to a few days. This massive ice sheet melts. A massive portion melts. And that collectively rose sea level hundreds of feet worldwide. Not just in small areas and small rises in sea level. No, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of feet that can be proven. Why can it be proven? Because not only did the sea level rise, and there's obvious examples as to how it rose, massive floods, evidence of massive floods. Now we're getting important details here. massive floods cascaded over North America. And not only is there examples of massive floods in North America, there was massive floods all around the world. Massive floods. Why do we know there was massive floods? There are examples in the physical makeup of our continents that show that massive floodplains, massive swaths of water flooded across the landscape, where there is still residual water retained from these floods. This is what the Great Lakes are. The indention that the massive sheets of ice left in the land itself left these indentions in the ground that are the Great Lakes, and there is that residual water left there. And then from there, the water flooded out through the Louisiana, causing these massive changes in the Earth's geography. We also had flooding out the west coast of the United States that also left huge changes in the geography there. And there is great work done by, I know it's going to be controversial to say this guy because he is a Freemason, and I understand you have to take everything people say with a grain of salt. And I am not promoting his ideology or the Freemasons in this case. I am just promoting the fact that he has provided ample amount of evidence. Look at his proofs. Don't look at him as an individual or what organization he may be a part of. Look at the evidence. And what does the evidence that he provides shows? The entire landscape and geography has been reshaped and reformed by massive paths of water that happened around 11,600 years ago, the very tail end of the Younger Dryas Ice Age period. And it's not just the North American continent. Again, we can see proofs of massive flooding worldwide. If we look at North Africa itself, the entire Sahara looks like swaths of water completely flooded the landscape. As we can see, it is completely reshapen, and it's a lot easier to see the flood paths when all that's left is sand than we can with trees covering the landscape. But towards my point here, around 11,600 years ago, right at the end of the Younger Dryas, there was some type of catastrophe, whether it just be part of the sun's normal cycle to where it warms and cools the earth. What we do know is it happened in a very short period of time, at least within a few years. And that time can be dated back precisely to 11,600 years because of the deposits of oceanic material at up to 600 or 700 feet above sea level on mountains, on cliff sides. We can find oceanic residue because of the massive floods, the massive waves left behind this residue. You can find ocean creatures and fossils left behind from those floods. Now, other than the geographic evidence that there was some kind of major event that happened 11,600 years ago that theoretically could have wiped the slate clean of any previous civilization that was living there, because you have to consider that where is most of civilization now, most of it's going to be centered around waterways, and any waterway is going to be completely wiped out if the sea level is raised 600 feet or more, and not much is going to be left. Any other structures that were left behind on the sea level in other areas are going to erode away over the years, and being that at least 10 to 12,000 years have passed since that time, we have to consider that the only thing that's going to be left are very large stone structures. Anything else is going to erode and degrade if it's not being upkept by the civilization. All of our modern civilization would be gone within a few thousand years. There would be nothing left other than very large, massive structures such as Mount Rushmore or the Hoover Dam, and some of the megaliths that were already there beforehand, such as the pyramids in Giza. The only things that will be left thousands of years if there is no upkeep because of the Earth's erosion are, again, large, massive megalithic type structures. Now, what other evidence that we have that proves that this type of event happened and occurred? Well, obviously, not all of human civilization was completely wiped out because we're here today. Somebody had to survive. And if there were survivors, they had to have known about the events. And of course, they had to pass on information that said event happened, right? Well, it just so happens that every major civilization throughout the world, not in just certain areas that pass on information, all around the world, separate civilizations that wouldn't meet each other before the printing press was even invented, had the same story. There was a massive flood. Let's just go through a few examples here, and I only use this link because they conveniently put together a lot of these sources that I have independently verified myself. Links will be in the description. Of course, everybody knows the story of Noah from the Judeo-Christian Bible, which just means the Old Testament because the Old Testament is so similar to the Jewish Torah, that there was a massive flood that completely wiped the earth other than Noah because he was given knowledge by God to build an ark and they survived. Then we have the story of Noah from the Quran, pretty much the exact same story. We had the story from the Manu, from the Hindus, same story. We had the tale of the merchant sea from the Buddhist, same story. We had the same story from the Sumerian tablets, again, one of the oldest civilizations that we know about, again, tell about this flood and how there were survivors. We had the Akkadian tablets saying the same thing. We had Babylonian tablets saying the same thing. We had the Egyptians talking about this flood, quote-unquote, myth. We had it in Greek mythology. We even had the European Norse talking about the exact same type of flood with survivors. We had the Aztecs in South America, completely other side of the world, talking about this, where supposedly nobody reached these people until the Spanish conquest. We had people in Nigeria and Africa talking about the same flood myth. Again, we showed the evidence of floods on that map there. We had the Chinese flood myth, again based around the same time period. We even had the Aborigines in Australia, completely quote-unquote isolated before that time, talking about a flood myth. We had the people in Hawaii completely separated on their own little islands for thousands of years because of the Polynesians that populated it, talking about a flood myth. So what does this tell us? It tells us that there is truth to the story. There is truth to the myth. Maybe the details, because of this information that was passed down from survivors over generation and thousands of years, of course, the details are not going to be exact, but it does say that the heart, the meat of the story, the fact that there was a massive flood that wiped out civilization and there were survivors is true. If we were to take any semblance of history and base off the evidence and research, and it tells us that there is truth to this story. It tells us that the people that made these massive structures, these structures that based off of water erosion and other dating principles that put these back into the Neolithic period, people that were advanced enough to make laser type precision in their stone constructions that can be seen worldwide. Again, these things are at least 12,000 years ago. Even in ancient Egypt, look at this. Again, near laser-like precision in perfectly symmetrical drill holes that again showed evidence that there was some type of drilling tools being used for this, where modern scientists say, oh no, it was used by bronze and stone tools that cut these areas out and that created these massive megalithic structures that were built with advanced precision, were made by these more primitive ancient civilizations, which they themselves in their own scripts credit those massive megaliths to the survivors of said catastrophe, the people that gave them that knowledge. And you know, the ancient astronaut theorists like to point at this and say, oh, it must have been aliens, which that doesn't have to be the case. And if we go with the most logical scenario, based off the evidence that I just gave you, is that there was an advanced civilization prior to 11,600 years ago, and due to this massive worldwide flood, forced whatever survivors they could, maybe into mountains, maybe into underground bunkers or construction, or some types of structures, which there are evidence that I can get to prove that in a later date survived from that said catastrophe and passed the information and technology to the new people that repopulated the earth, just like the flood stories, just like Noah, the biblical stories, just like the Quran. This is what makes most sense. And again, most of the civilizations that were remnants from this are going to be either underwater or completely eroded away through the thousands of years and minimal upkeep. And thousands of examples exist to this day, just off the coast of China, just off the coast of India, just off the Bahamas. There's a massive mile-long wall that's underwater, just off the coast of Cuba, just off the coast of Alaska, just about everywhere. There are examples of civilizations that lived just a few miles off the coast, but because of the rise in sea level, those civilizations are completely underwater. You think about Atlantis, for example, a city that was said to be lost under a massive wave in less than a day, which again That's possible because as we go back to the evidence of the Younger Dryas and we look at the ice samples, it shows that this could happen as small as a few days. A civilization could be completely wiped off the face of the earth by massive floods and massive waves, like the Atlantis story. And the Atlantis story wasn't just based off of myth, it was actual information that was passed down from Pluto as he wrote it down. And he got it from Socrates, and Socrates got it from the Egyptians, I believe. I might have got the names mixed up there, but that was actual information that was passed down about the Atlantis civilization. And there's examples of other civilizations that were wiped out. But again, mainstream says no, it was just hunter-gatherers, primitive human beings that could have never possibly built these giant megalithic structures. And then again, they use the trick of dating those megalithic sites. Again, these advanced technologies. For one example, there is the Sphinx there in Egypt, that based off the water erosion alone, this could be up to 30,000 years old. This is massive amounts of water erosion. And one might say, well, it's in the middle of the desert. Where's this water erosion coming from? And again, this is proof that it goes past what it's been dated to a few thousand years ago, which they date the ancient Egyptian civilization to. It had to at least based off of water erosion alone, be over 5,000 years old, because there has been no rain or no massive amounts of water in Giza in over 5,000 years, other than sometimes the Nile flooding, which could have never produced that amount of water erosion in just a few thousand years. It had to have been at least over 5,000 years ago, when Egypt used to be a more tropical environment, more rain-inducive environment, again based off the Earth's tilt. How the Sahara Desert used to not be a desert because of the Earth's tilt that changes the environment over thousands of years. There is so much towards that. And if we're bumping human history beyond 10,000 years, that means we have to rewrite history. That means we have to look at our technology. We have to look at primitive technology, and we have to look at this ancient, more advanced technology and say, wait a minute, they did things totally differently. We have to look at the purpose of, say, the pyramids. Why did they have pyramids to begin with? Pyramids were not for burials. Contrary to popular beliefs, no mummies have ever been found in any of the pyramids. They just slapped that title on there because they wanted to make sense to these massive structures that no sins could be attributed to. Not for such a primitive society. So what are the purposes of the pyramids? What are the purposes of a lot of these massive structures? And how did they build massive structures, some of which have stones that are tens, 20s, thousands of tons? Just look at Baalbek in Lebanon. I mean, holy hell. These are massive structures. How did they move such massive stones? And these aren't built into rock. These were stones that were quarried and moved. And you're telling me that ancient civilizations moved stones that are the size of houses? Solid granite, solid material, solid stone. I mean, just look at these things. What was the technology that they were using? And why does the mainstream not want to look further into this? Why do they like to label that it was the more modern civilizations built on top of these megaliths that were attributed to making them, when they never had the technology to move such massive megaliths? Hopefully this introductory video will get you interested in that. I'm sure as hell interested in it. And I want to look into the technology. I want to look into more proofs that this is not just ancient technology. This is pre-existing advanced technology. Maybe a civilization that was closer to ours than a lot of people would like to admit. And then once we can piece together that, we can start piecing together how our society has come about. Why some secret societies even try to mimic themselves off of these ancient societies. There's a lot of connections here. And trust me, the more I dig into it, the more interesting it really does get. And I'm sure the more we piece together, the more sense it will all make. Now, for those of you that are still here, haven't turned it off, haven't got disgusted by me even talking about this topic, again, this is just an introductory video. It's not as structured as I would like it to be, but it is getting my foot into the door onto the topic. I have a list of gentlemen here that Again, just like I explained about Randall Carlson, take them as an individual with a grain of salt, and you don't have to take their individual preferences into account. I mean, it is a factor, but look at what evidence they're providing. The solid physical, you can put your hands on, you can see, you can feel evidence that is hard to argue against, and then build your own theories around it based off the research and evidence. Here is a list of 6 gentlemen that can be your starting point. Number 1, Graham Hancock. He covers all of this. So he's pretty much the broad spectrum of all of it. Again, he has his own theories to all of it, but again, he does provide tons of physical evidence to look at. Graham Hancock. Links will be in the description. Then we have, again, Randall Carlson. He does the whole geography aspect of all of it. Then we have Brian Forster. He covers Inca and South America, these megaliths that are found in South America, such as Pumapunku and Machu Picchu. We have Robert Schoch. He is the guy that does the whole water erosion on the Sphinx. He's done a lot of work there in Egypt and other pyramids and other megaliths around that area. We have Robert Bauval. Again, he's in the same line as Robert Schoch, covering more and more of Egypt, because Egypt is essentially the hotbed of megaliths on Earth other than South America. Then one more that I will throw in there is John Anthony West. Again, not looking at personal preferences, just looking at the evidence that they have provided, because they have done hands-on research, and then they let you look at the evidence. Please do comment, please do like this video and share it. Let me know that you're interested in this, because I want to talk about this. I want to research and put together a real world history map. That's one of my dreams, is to be able to have a map like this in a timeline of history and not go, wait a minute, is everything accurate in this? Is everything true? I want to be able to look through history and to feel confident that it is relatively close to what really happened, because nothing is more important to me than finding out the truth, and not only just the truth, but the truth about everything. Geopolitics, history, science, all of it. I want to know the truth and nothing but the truth. That's going to be all for now, guys. If you appreciate the work we do here and want to continue to see us grow, head on down to our Patreon in the links below and send us a buck or two. Continue to keep your eyes open, and as always, this has been Tyranny Unmasked.